Hey, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours FM, episode number 76. I am your host, Carrie Dills, and today I might be a little language challenged. My English is never perfectly stellar, but today my guest, it takes an extra bit for this texting to say it right. So I'm gonna go for it, and then I'm gonna give you the chance to correct me. So, Alain Schlesser.
Yeah, very good.
Yes, nailed it. So yes, welcome to the show, Alain. It's great to have you.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be on.
Excellent. Well, thank you for you guys who are tuning in live. If you have questions for Alain, you can send those on Twitter to #OfficeFM, or if you're listening over on watching via the Google Hangout, you can ask via the Q&A app. All right. So we have no sponsors this episode, so we pay homage to no one but ourselves. So let's just get cranking with the good stuff. So we were talking a little bit pre-show about where you are from and where you are now. You were saying you moved from Luxembourg to Germany due to the high cost of living.
Yes, I worked as a government agent in Luxembourg for more than a decade, and housing in Luxembourg is very expensive. And when we decided that we wanted to change our lives, my wife and me, we also decided to move to another country where the housing is much cheaper, so that we have some room, some financial wiggle room to be able to build up something new before running out of cash, so to speak.
Sounds like a wise plan. Do you still have family back in Luxembourg?
Yes, yeah. But we visit them regularly. It's only a bit more than an hour to drive to visit them. So we'll see them, I don't know, at least twice a month or so.
Okay. Well, I've got lots of questions for you, but before we go anywhere, allow me to congratulate you on your new role as CTO for the WP Developers Club.
Thank you.
Yes, I was very excited to see that. So for folks that maybe you're not familiar with the WP Developers Club, can you give us the rundown?
Yes, the WP Developers Club is a very wonderful place that Tonya, which you had on your show 2 sessions ago, I think, has created. It tries to address the need in the WordPress ecosystem for more formalized education, for certification, and it tries to push the envelope of WordPress development forward in terms of software quality and in terms of what developers also demand of themselves to be able to how do I phrase it? WordPress makes it very easy to start, but makes it very complicated to use best practices that have developed in on other platforms. It is very difficult to use such best practices on the WordPress platform, and that's where the WP Developer School wants to help, so that people get to learn all the best practices. They get to learn proper software architecture, proper software development, object-oriented programming principles, and so on. It's a wonderful community that you can join for free. There are the major courses. They are, of course, they come with a tuition, but you can just join for free and join us in Slack, where there's a lot of interaction going on. There are people of all skill levels that help each other out, and there's also a great sense of curiosity that comes across in this community, and it's a very inspiring place to be.
I'm excited about it, and I think it might have been episode 67 that I had Tanya on. I'll have to go back and look at that. But so in your role as CTO, will you be kind of helping shape the coursework, or how does that fit in?
I have two main roles. The first role is to keep everything running from the technical side of things, make decisions about the architecture to use, and implement all the stuff that needs to be implemented. And the other is to help shape the code base on which the whole site runs, which is also the example that is made to show people what a proper code base should look like for WordPress site. So we're eating our own dog food, so to speak. The code base that is being built and has already been built in large parts for WP Developers Club is the same code base that will be used as an example for the courses. The courses themselves, it's Tanya who builds these, and she's also the main teacher. There are also workshops that will be added at a later point in time, where there will probably also be other teachers that focus on different areas. But the main coursework, it's Tonya who builds everything and who will also teach it.
Well, Tanya's going to run out of Tanya, so I'm glad that she's bringing on some help to help flesh out the WP Developers Club. So if you're listening to this and you haven't checked that out yet, go over to wpdevelopersclub.com, and like Alain said, it's free to be a part of that. And yeah, the Slack, I'm more of a lurker than participator over in the Slack channel, but some good, interesting.
I saw you in the corner sometimes, lurking from the outside.
I lurk, and then when I have questions, I jump in. I'm just take. Oh. Okay, so Gary wants to know: have you ever
Okay.
have you ever entered a David Grohl lookalike contest? You do bear a striking resemblance to Mr. Foo Fighter.
Okay, that's a bit less of a technical question than I anticipated from Gary. So I'm a bit out of answers now. No, I didn't attend a contest like this.
Well,
I have
you could be a model
somewhere, but I'm not a great singer.
All right. Well, maybe you could do a lip sync kind of thing. I don't know. We'll put that on the backside. If we've got time at the end of the podcast, we'll hook that up. Thank you, Gary, for that insightful question. Jackie is asking, any thoughts on PHP 7 and how it will impact WordPress and coding standards? Great question, Jackie.
Yes, PHP 7 has a few new features that are really great to be able to build a more robust code base. One big change is that you can, for example, type hint your return values. So you can tell other functions let me rephrase, a function that you develop, it can tell other functions what type of object or variable it will return. So you'll get immediate errors when you have a mismatch in there.
In terms of a data type?
Yes, you'll get a type mismatch error or an exception gets thrown. This sounds really bad when when there's errors flying around, but normally in development you want to have real hard errors all the times. You don't want something that runs normally, but sometimes it breaks, sometimes it works, and you don't know really why. So normally you want to build your code so that when there's a potential error, there's immediately an error that gets thrown to pull your attention to the area where the problem lies. Because when you have a code base that runs but does not give the right output, you don't know really where to start to debug it.
Yes, the worst possible. I used to be on Windows machines. We were talking about this pre-show that you just recently switched from Windows to Mac, but
yes,
on Windows machines, you get the most useless error message ever. Like, does not work. Or something so generic and non-specific, it was difficult to troubleshoot. So that's so good on the specificity.
Well, the worst problems you can have with WordPress sites are that you build something, you run it, and you simply get an empty page without an error message. So if you have something like this, you don't know where to start. So this is one of these best practices, is that you always want to build your code so that it has very strict requirements and that it immediately breaks when you don't meet these requirements. You want everything to fail fast and to fail hard. It sounds really bad, but it saves a lot of time debugging.
So backing up just a little bit, Devinder had a question. He says, when you refer to building your code base, are you referring to building WordPress themes or more of your general PHP, CSS workflow?
The code base I was mentioning earlier. Well, the code base, it's a combination of everything that makes up the site. In fact, when you build WordPress is just one component of the entire system. You have a lot of plugins, some pre-made, some custom built for a complex site. You have a theme. You maybe have additional databases that are running somewhere. You have media assets and so on and so on. So the code base, it's normally you could say that WordPress, it's just one of the many libraries you'll use to build a website. Yeah, the PHP code, it's a lot of plugins that you run, because that is a way to extend WordPress without modifying the core source, which would break updates. Of course, you'll have a theme with every site that you want to make public, but there are also there might be integration code. For example, if you want to if you have some data somewhere in another system, you'll need to write integration code that gets data from one server and translates it and puts it into the database of another server, things like this. We have, for example, a system to auto-invite people that sign up to Slack. That's one simple example now of such integrations. They always have code that makes the bridge between WordPress and some other system that gets integrated.
All right, thank you. Devinder, I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to send it again. We've got a question from Robert. He's asking that, so there's a elementaries course over in the WP Developers Club, and when it opens, will more than 10 people be let in, or is that a hard maximum?
There's some good news. The elementaries course will be free. The elementaries course is something that Tonja intends to be free because it's so valuable to the entire community. And it's sort of an entry point to see where this might take you and to be able to evaluate the quality of the course. Then there's the Dev Apprentice program. That's limited to 10 participants per session.
Okay, which makes sense because there's a lot of actual one-on-one as opposed to a video that could be consumed by many.
The elementary course, it's mostly theoretical stuff. You can go through the videos and read through the course materials. The Dev Apprentice program it's two main parts. One part, the learning stage, where these 10 people will all build the same website and get accompanied to build this. And then there's another second stage where it's planned that the participants can build a real site for a client of theirs with guidance and mentoring along the way. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I couldn't. I had a wrong button there. That's very, very cool to get the that real live example, because sometimes, you know, working sample code, it's one thing, but actually putting it into you know, the context of a real project is something else. So that's sounds very well worth it.
Well, there are still some details we'll have to flesh out. The project, the client projects, they also need to fit some basic requirements so that this can work. But the main plan is that if you go through the entire Dev Apprentice course, you'll have created as much value as the course has cost you.
Awesome. That's called value pricing right there.
Yes.
So Jackie, I think you know the answer to this question, but I'm glad you're asking it anyway. So, you know, typically when you're first learning how to modify Genesis themes or any theme in order to make a child theme, you open up functions.php and just shove all the customizations in there. Which obviously can get a little out of hand depending on how many modifications are. But Jackie's question is, can you talk about building a core plugin and why that's better, or if it's better than adding code to functions.php?
Yes. Well, a core plugin has one main advantage. It is 100% reusable. So it is a library of code that you could put as it is into your source control, pull it in for a project. When you see that there are some things missing, you'll add them to this core plugin, push these changes back to your source repository, and you can run an update for all your sites that use this core plugin. And this enables you to grow your core plugin over time, so that you yourself get more and more efficient building client sites, because there's more and more code that's already pre-built in your custom plugin. And your theme will reuse this code and will simply add the things that are site-specific, project-specific. So, for example, instead of having all the code that creates, I don't know, all the code that creates a specific custom post type, you'll have functionality in your core plugin that registers the post type, that has all your custom stuff to adapt the admin backend for your clients, that has the ability to sort, to filter, don't know what else you could add as features. And in your functions .php file, you simply have one line adding custom post type of type XYZ, and you're done. And if you find a bug with your code, you'll have to make one change and simply push this new version of your plugin to all of your client sites. So you can debug all the sites with one push.
Okay, well, let's take that a step further because I've used the core plugin, that concept on a number of projects, and recently somebody brought up, it might have been Gary Jones, maybe it wasn't Gary, so sorry if it's not, I'm attributing it to you, but of abstracting even your core plugin into little individual plugins. So say that, each plugin stands alone. So this is a plugin that deals with custom post types. This is a plugin that deals with your meta boxes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, versus having them all lumped into one. What's your thoughts on that?
This might make sense depending on what the scope of your core plugin is like. But I think that Gary was not talking about plugins, but about objects.
I do see a comment from him. He says, would core functionality be better as separate composer packages pulled into a core plugin?
Yes. You would have different objects. One object to deal with meta boxes, one object to deal with custom post types. And with objects, you can have them included through Composer, and Composer will also deal with the auto-loading. So auto-loading is a mechanism in PHP that allows you to just say what class you want. Class is a blueprint for an object. And the autoloader will try to find the file for you. So normally you'll have your PHP files full of requires and includes for all the different files if you split it up into many different files. And with classes and objects and an autoloader, you can get rid of all of this. You'll simply tell Composer to add your metabox package, and in your plugin you say metabox is new metabox with these and these arguments, and the autoloader will manage to the include of the class file, so that you don't have to deal with this. And one of the main advantages of this is performance benefit. You can put 100 classes in there into your packages. If you only use one class, only this one class will get included. Only this file will be processed by PHP. All the others will not be touched. So you can have a large library of pre-built functionality and only use the ones you need without having a performance impact.
Well, while we're on the subject of performance, I had a great question from Teresa, and I think it's when you first start learning WordPress, you're all the plugins. No need to write anything myself. I'll get plugins to do it, and then at some point you learn enough to know, whoa, too many plugins is terrible. You shouldn't have 80 plugins, but the fact is, a plugin in and of itself is not, it just depends whether it's a well-written plugin or not, whether or not it's a,
The number itself is irrelevant. If you have plugins that are properly coded, they have exactly the same performance impact as if you would put everything into one file, or if you would put it into WordPress core. If the plugin is properly coded, it will have no performance impact at all. The problem with plugins is that most of the time they are badly coded, and most often you'll have plugins that do some stuff on the front end. And for the front end, you'll have to include assets. You'll have to include style sheets. You'll have to include JavaScript. And if you have 100 plugins installed that each include their style sheet, you'll have 100 different small style sheets that get loaded through the HTTP protocol. So that's a huge performance impact. Of course, you can always do some performance optimization after the fact. For example, taking all these style sheets and then concatenating them and putting them in one minified style sheet. But that's always only it's not an optimal solution, an ideal solution.
So assuming the plugins are well coded, and we're not calling in references to a million external style sheets, is there any performance difference if I took that code that's in the plugin and plopped it into functions.php in theory?
If there are no major differences in the way it is called, it is activated, it will not have a noticeable performance impact. Might be a small performance impact the first time we run it because there's one more file that the server needs to retrieve or something like this. But these are not things you need to worry about when it comes to performance. When you have, I don't know, your internet connection, your bandwidth is completely wasted because there's a dozen files that get loaded without being needed. We're talking about entire seconds here. So if you can avoid a millisecond on the server file access, that's completely irrelevant. So having a plugin or having a function in functions.php makes no real difference.
Well, in Texas, we would say there are bigger fish to fry when it comes to performance.
Exactly. Optimization has always needs to start at a high level from top to bottom. You don't start with some meager file access somewhere to start optimizing, because you will only complicate your code and make the more important optimizations more difficult.
Question, going back to, you mentioned having a core plugin that you could automatically push updates to multiple client sites. And Jackie asked, can you share some of the, well, actually, so, oops, I got the wrong question there. How do you handle pushing those updates?
That's a great question. That's one of the problems that still remains to be completely solved with WordPress. There are a lot of interesting ways to go about this, but there's no magic bullet as far as I can tell so far, because you'll always have to deal with differences between hosts. For example, a git push will do nothing if the server doesn't have git installed. There are ways, for example, to use a CI system to let the CI system build everything and put it on the server through SFTP. But then again, the server might not allow this. So there's no one solution that will fit for each client, because most clients always come with their own hosting, their own requirements. So we're talking about a theoretical benefit here when I say you can update all of your sites. It's more you can update multiple sites at a time. Let's rephrase it like this.
Fair enough. And the vendor
control everything from server from the server that does the hosting, from the source repository and the whole team that works with you. There would be methods to be able to achieve this completely, but in reality, you'll probably never reach this scenario.
Devendra did remind me over on Twitter that if you're using EDD, Easy Digital Downloads, their software licensing tool, you can actually set it to push updates. But of course, that would be more for if you're offering a premium plugin or something. I could see that being a good solution. Phil asked, can you recommend some resources for learning object-oriented programming?
Well, the best resource is Uncle Bob. That's Robert Martin. Robert C. Martin is called like that. He is one of the best known thinkers in the object-oriented world. When you're talking specifically about PHP, it gets a bit more difficult because PHP world is there's a lot of major differences between object-oriented programming in a dynamically typed language and in a statically typed language. If you look at the code in Java or C++, which are statically typed languages, there's a lot more going on as there is in PHP. If you simply use this code, which normally most material you can see online that teaches object-oriented programming will probably use constructs from Java or C++. If you use code like this in PHP, it will be unnecessarily complicated and you will have more trouble making it work than it's worth the hassle. But if properly implemented, PHP is actually a very convenient language to use object-oriented programming because of the dynamic typing, it lets you take some shortcuts that still allow you to use object-oriented programming while avoiding the strict rules that make so complicated code necessary, like in Java. I know of a few people who do a lot of great, interesting stuff online. There's I don't know if I can now even pronounce the names correctly. It might perhaps be easier if I write this in the show notes later, a few references to people who have great blogs about this. And I know Carl Alexander is writing a book specifically about PHP and object-oriented programming. And as far as I can tell from his blog, this will probably be good stuff. And there's one that Gary Jones recommended to me, but I can't really remember the name. I also let you
Gary, throw it out there on Twitter.
It was Brandon. I can't remember his surname. He has also written a book specifically about PHP and object-oriented programming. But good material in the PHP world is very rare because it's a recent evolution for PHP itself, and most people working in PHP for a long time were never in the situation that they could learn proper object-oriented programming because PHP before version 5 did not even allow it to write proper object-oriented code.
Gary chimed in and he said that is Brandon Savage that's working on that other. Exactly. And Tanya's chiming in and she says that Dev School will teach you object-oriented programming.
Of course. Of course.
Can't miss the chance to throw the sale in there.
I felt a marketing opportunity there.
Tanya knows how it's done. So Leonica asked, do you have any resources on core plugins? Are there, I don't know if I've seen any resources on core plugins, but just to kind of learn the concept, or would you suggest just going and looking at some that already exist?
As a core plugin, not necessarily, because these are very, very personal projects, I would say, because it's something you build to adapt the normal programming environment to your your preferences. So I don't think you can easily share most of these core plugins between developers, because that misses the point. There's, however, I want to add that you should not only look into core plugins, because a plugin is only one method to integrate a reusable component. In WordPress, we constantly use plugins for all sorts of stuff, but you could, for example, also have a core library that gets included in all of your plugins. So it does not necessarily need to be a separated plugin. A separated plugin allows you to put it as a must-use plugin, for example. That's one of the advantages. But it's also it might also be beneficial to have common code, core code, inside library instead of a plugin, depending on how you prefer to work.
Interesting. Yeah.
What is very interesting in recent PHP development is well, recent. It's not so recent, but it takes some time to really get used a lot in yeah, mainly in WordPress world. It's Composer. Composer is package management for PHP, and you can, for example, have a personal Git repository somewhere that you can simply pull in through Composer. So when you create a new plugin, there's one line in your Composer .json file that references your core functionality Git repository, for example. And then it gets simply pulled in. And if you make changes to this Git repository and you do a Composer update, you will always get the newest version of this. So that's another way to use to build a reusable component. And the main word I want to stress is reusable. If you want to progress as a developer, you have to make sure that you build your own code base as reusable as possible. The worst thing you can do is start fresh from scratch with every project. Then you will always stay at the same level. If you manage to build reusable components, you will always be able to advance from project to project, and you'll be able to tackle more complex and more larger scope projects given time.
That is excellent advice. We have a question here from Jackie. She's asking if you were doing a core plugin, say for a client, would you make it a must-use or MU plugin?
I'd say this pretty much depends on what exactly the site is about, how the infrastructure is built. There are sites that contain a lot of custom functionality, where you'll end up with 20 plugins which contain the different modules that you had to build to have the custom functionality. There it makes sense to have a core plugin that you'll add as a must-use, where all the other modules depend upon. If you have a website that is standard WordPress block with one custom functionality, it would make more sense to build one plugin that pulls in your custom code as a library and is independent of everything else.
Yeah, I guess it would, if you have a plugin that's a single point of failure, if it's not active, that would definitely be one that you wanted to use in a must-use. Let's see here. We have all kinds of good questions. Thanks everybody for sending these in today. I've got one from Devender. He is asking if you've used either Joomla or Drupal, and if so, do they offer a better code base than WordPress?
I've dabbled in both just to evaluate the platforms to see if they are interesting to me, to the way I'd like to work. And I would say that both of these are much more difficult to maintain. The way they are built makes it relatively easy to have a site set up once with your custom look. It's easier to have some custom look in there as it is with WordPress. But the larger your site gets and the more complex your site gets, the more you'll have trouble maintaining it, the more expensive it gets to make additional changes, and they are both very bad at scaling the working hours you'll have to invest to grow the site. As with WordPress, it's not exactly linear, but if you have a large site, when you want to add one functionality, it's not much more complicated than with a very small site. It's no big change. There are more things you need to be aware of, but it's not exponentially more work to do it.
Interesting. I've never worked with either. I know, generally speaking, people who've worked in Joomla or Drupal tend to look at WordPress developers as sort of the nursery school of development. So I just wondered what was going on in terms of complexity with, or maybe not complexity, sophistication of those code bases that would cause people to have that opinion about WordPress.
WordPress has a very low barrier of entry, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time. It allows everyone to be able to just use the 5-minute install and get going with their blogs. But it also means that you'll have a million blogs that teach you how to do things on WordPress the wrong way. So it's difficult to find good advice for WordPress because there are so many people that just were playing around with for some hours and then share their advice. It's a nice thing that they want to share their knowledge, but it's because the barrier of entry is so low, there are no safeguards to keep people from posting horrible advice online.
Well, WP Developer Club is most definitely raising the bar in that department, and I love seeing it. And Gary has a question here for you. He says, can you explain the benefits of moving away from the default WordPress structure, i.e. Bedrock and WP Starter?
Yeah.
That might have been a loaded question.
Yeah. The way WordPress is normally installed is very bad for deployment. It pretty much, in its default installation, makes a proper deployment path impossible.
Is that due to, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but is that due to the database and the way the data interacts with the files, or just in general?
No, the database is always a separate issue from the file system. Database is always does always need special consideration for deployments because of the way it is stored. We're talking just file system structure here, how the files and the folders are laid out. The normal structure that WordPress uses mixes all sorts of stuff in its hierarchy, so that you can't separate the stuff that you build from the stuff that comes with WordPress. So for a proper deployment, normally you'd have your source version of the site, which only contains the information that is specific for your site. And then you'd have a build system that uses this source and builds the completed site. And as I already mentioned earlier, WordPress is just one component of the final site. So in a proper deployment system, WordPress would be a dependency of your custom build site and pulled in as a dependency, just as your plugins that come from the WordPress repository or anything else you can use as dependency. And when you switch the folder structure around for WordPress, you can get closer to this proper deployment path. You can have one folder where the code base for WordPress is, that is the WordPress core with all the files that come with it. And you have another folder that contains all the custom definitions for your site. In other languages, often this is called the app versus the library or the web server or whatever. So WordPress is only a dependency of your site, and you're building the app. You're not building something inside of WordPress. You're building something that uses WordPress amongst other systems to have a completed product. And if you switch this around, as you can see examples with Bedrock that Gary mentioned, and the WP Starter repository from We Code More in GitHub. Both address the same issues with different ways to go about. Bedrock uses an Ansible playbook. This means this is a script that gets run through to build the entire site in an automated way. So you can point a script to a server, and the script goes to this server and installs everything that is necessary for the site, with WordPress being one of the dependencies, the Linux core and the Nginx web server being other dependencies. And this is all automated until you end up with the final site. And the WP Starter repository is a similar thing, but using Composer, the PHP package manager, and pulling in WordPress as one of the Composer dependencies. So Composer is just a package like Yoast SEO or something else that is reusable and is readily made out there. And you'll end up in your Git repository with your custom-built source code and your composer.json file, which details all the dependencies that your custom code has. And when you run Composer install, everything gets automatically downloaded, installed. Again, WordPress being one of the many packages that get pulled in. And so you can automate your entire build system. And when you have a new developer come on board, he will do a git clone of your repository, then run Composer install inside this repository, and then he has a working local development machine that runs the site.
So for you guys that are listening that took my WP development workflow course, this is kind of this. So imagine if you're using Grunt and you have your package.json file that has all your Grunt tasks, or excuse me, your dependencies listed in there. Then you run one install and it just it brings in each of those packages. So exactly. A lot of what you're talking about is just that concept, but on a much broader level, where WordPress is just one of those dependencies.
It's the same concept, just you need to do some extra magic to get WordPress to fit into the system that everyone else uses, pretty much.
Can you give oh, go ahead.
When you're using your package.json file, this is the package manifest for the npm package manager, which is the package manager of node.js. And Composer has its composer.json file, which is the same manifest just for the PHP package manager Composer. So npm and Composer are equals in different languages.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. That's it. Yeah, we're talking. I think you're going over my head, so it's possible that you're going over some listeners' heads too. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this episode and then just sign up for WP Dev School.
I didn't ask the question.
No, it's actually it's fantastic information. It's nice to sort of peek over, getting out of kind of the rut of the things that you're used to, and peek over and see what smarter, more experienced developers are doing. So thanks for letting us peek over your shoulder. I was going to ask, in the case of a complicated build where WordPress would just be one of many things, can you give an example of a project that you've worked on where that was like, we're not talking mom and dad's ice cream store's blog for this sort of implementation. No. So what kind of site are we talking about?
This is nice to have if you're doing solo projects, but it only really starts to make sense if you're working in a team. Because when you're working in a team, it starts to become very time-consuming to let new people join the development work, to get them up to task, to have them set up with the working environment where they can finally start to code. So in such a team, automating all this work of setting up the environment can save a lot of time. Where it also makes sense is if you have very specific requirements for the deployment, because when you have such a system in place to build the development environment in an automated fashion, it's just one extra step to have the deployment to live be automated, to staging or to live. So you can, for example, have a build system that will create a new vagrant virtual machine with your development environment when you tell it to install dev, and when you tell it to install live, it will, or staging, it will create a new DigitalOcean droplet where it will do the same process, and you'll have a live server online that was built in an automated fashion. When you do CI, continuous implementation, there it is a requirement. So this means that there are constant builds that are being done of the code base, and the code base that is in the repository, for example, the master branch, should be buildable and testable at all times. So you'll have a CI system that contains all the build steps and that can run the entire build process on its own. And will, for example, with every Git push to the master branch, it will run a complete build, run all the tests, and immediately tell you if your last commit has introduced breaking errors or problems that made tests fail or something like this. And you can, for example, automate this process so that when you git push, you'll have all the tests run, and if all the tests succeed, this gets automatically pushed to the live site.
That's awesome. I'm imagining the little all the things guy just saying automate all the things.
In traditional software development, releases are always months or even years apart. So you'll have version 1.0, which works somehow, and then 6 months later there comes version 2.0, which is already a bit better. With a web app, for example, if you have software as a service, web app, something that people use on live, normally you'll have a system like this behind that allows you to release very often. So you can release new versions of the software daily if you want. So when people tell you, okay, there's this little feature that is missing or this little bug that is nagging me, it's a matter of days to have a new release on live that fixes this.
Very cool. Okay, guys, if you're listening live, you've got time for one or two more quick questions. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in to Office Hours FM. You'll be able to catch a replay of this episode over at officehours.fm or over on YouTube or over on Google+. Check the officehours.fm community over there. We're pretty much, I'm all over the place. And if you would like email reminders of upcoming episodes, just go to officehours.fm/subscribe and we'll get those taken care of. By the way, Alain, I apologize for the chronic misspelling of your name. Can we just blame it on El Nino or the weather, or my being Texan, maybe, I don't know, or yeah. Getting those fixed. Okay, so Devinder says, I need to speed up my PHP movement. Lots of stairs yet to climb, but thank you for the inspiration. So yeah, you've given us a lot to noodle on and shown us that there's a lot more than just sort of the cookie cutter WordPress functions.php plugins world that we've just kind of grown used to. And not that that's bad. It's just there's a lot more that we can ways that we can utilize WordPress.
I noticed a big difference between backgrounds where people are coming from when they start working in WordPress, and a lot of WordPress folks have design background, so they approach building a website as a designer, which is a great thing. And I have another background. I approach the whole thing as developer, so I can also do design, but that's not always the best use of my time. Let's put it that way. I'm more of the developer, and I had the opportunity before working with WordPress to see how things are done in other on other platforms, in other languages, and it's always a good idea to look outside of your current platform and see how other people are doing it, because there are a lot of approaches that can be transposed to the WordPress ecosystem. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the WP Developers Club, is to use these best practices that have existed for decades already and introduce them to the WordPress people that don't have this developer background.
Excellent advice. I got one more. Jackie's getting one in under the wire. She says, can you recommend any tools to automate importing a static HTML site into WordPress? Ooh. I don't know about that.
Importing,
because there's the data piece of the puzzle. You'd have to. Yeah, I'm stumped. You got anything?
Yeah, in a static site, you don't have any data. You just have HTML. You can always use a subfolder somewhere in your install and use some rewrite rules magic in your htaccess or nginx file to directly point at these files, properly integrating them in WordPress. You could load them in as pages and create a page template that pretty much gets rid of everything that's WordPress specific, sidebar, header, footer, and only displays this this static page full screen. That would be one way. But I'd say it depends on the exact use case.
Yeah, I would say scrape the data and just build this, rebuild the site from the ground up.
Probably when we would talk about real use case, probably I would say it's missing the point of WordPress. So it really depends. If it's a legacy site that you have to load into there that you can't really use WordPress for, there are ways to do this, but it will never be elegant. WordPress is not meant to have something like this. It would either be rewrite rules that point to a folder, or manually editing the pages and having a page template, I'd say.
All right. Well, we are up. Time is up. Thank you to those of you who tune in live. And if you're catching this after the fact, I really appreciate your listening as well. If you enjoy the show, you're always more than welcome to leave a kind review over at iTunes or Stitcher. Alain, thank you so much for your time. You are a veritable fount of knowledge. Where can people find you if they would like to follow up with you?
I'm trying to be more active on Twitter at the moment. So you can see my Twitter handle at the bottom here. I have started a personal blog yesterday or so at alainschlesser.com. You should take a screenshot because it's very difficult to write the name properly. I can be found in a lot of Slack groups like the WP Developers Club, of course, also the Genesis WP Slack group. And I have a website where I focus more on the business side of things at brightnucleus.com, which is in desperate need of a redesign, or pretty much of a design, I'd say. That's yeah.
Okay. Well, no shortage of ways to find you. And thank you again so much. And to everybody tuning in, we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.